Dunedin Mayor Cull has said that the council should set a goal of reducing car parks each year because of the benefits to public health and local businesses a move away from cars would deliver.
Hear, hear.
That is nut job thinking from somebody who's never run a business in this town. I've run a business here for several decades, and it only really began to flourish when I built my own car park on site. Car parking is fundamental for most businesses.
Okay, so
Society has to change, though. Society has to change. We can't continue our dependence on fossil fuels. There has to be alternatives, and cycling's such a good one.
I'm not suggesting a dependence on fossil fuels. 90% of my driving is done in an electric car. Fabulous, cheap, clean.
And I suspect you're below the 1.6% threshold.
The 1.6 reduce in emissions is probably because of the electric cars. We've got 400 of them from nowhere now here in Dunedin.
Have you got 400? Look, I want to ask you, are the media beating this up, or are you seeing evident aggression on the roads now? Is it really a situation which is causing a lot of unhappiness?
I'm seeing evident aggression on the roads. I'm certainly seeing a lot of it on Facebook. And unfortunately, there are just a small cohort of cyclists that aren't helping at all. A, by running red lights. B, by actually using their vulnerability as some kind of a weapon, if you like. It's unfortunate that the worst side of people's nature comes out when they feel insecure or when they're vulnerable. And poorly designed cycleways, especially when they mix them with heavy traffic, makes people very insecure and very vulnerable. And I think that the design of the cycleways has been the fundamental problem.
Councillor Lee Vandervis in Dunedin, thank you, Lee, for talking to us. Texter says, will you follow this up with a comment about David Attenborough saying our CO2 emissions are the biggest threat to civilisation and millennia, and he's not alone. And that is, of course, the other salient aspect here, the need to change our emitting ways. But the panellist from Napier has been supplying interjections as we went there.
Yeah,
I'm very sorry about that. I couldn't.
Not at all.
I couldn't resist, and I was with you 100%.
Thank you, Emma. I think Mr. Vanderus should go and write a fiction book from somewhere. I'm virtually speechless. I just think that anything we can do in our country to increase walking, cycling, electric cars, electric bikes is a good thing. I think Mayor Cull's approach in Dunedin to continually reduce the number of car parks is a wonderful disincentive to people to actually use their cars, because at the moment, electric cars are a novelty still. There will be a tipping point at some stage where they're not, and I hope that comes soon. I'm saving up buying a new car at the moment until I can afford an electric car.
How do you get to work at the current
Sometimes I walk, sometimes I have to take my car because I have to go to courts in other parts of Hawke's Bay. When I'm in Auckland, where I stay in Auckland, I often get the bus into the city. Sometimes I take an Uber.
So you're putting your money where your mouth is, in other words, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I am, and I really believe that it's an important thing to do. So those sort of attitudes really get under my skin. I'm
He's
sorry
irked.
I am irked, Emma. I am irked in the extreme. I'm sorry, Jim, for hijacking with this emotive vitriol.
Not only that, but you've managed to close the program as well. Jonathan Krebs, thank you very much for being on the panel today. Emma Espiner, you too. That's us, everybody, despite the lack of music, and Checkpoint is on the way.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, we're facing a rising tide of mental distress and addiction, where too many people are treated with a lack of dignity, respect and empathy, or just not treated at all, according to a new report. The Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry makes 40 recommendations. Death of legendary director Geoff Murphy, who died yesterday, aged 80, and roast beef like you wouldn't believe it. Thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten, DNA. A massive expansion to mental health services has been recommended by the authors of a 200-page report released today. The near 10-month inquiry into mental health and addiction concluded the system is failing to provide adequate services for the majority of those suffering mental health or addiction problems. Currently, the majority of services are focused on the top 3% with acute needs, but the report recommends that be expanded to 20%. The head of the Mental Health Foundation, Sean Robinson, says there are already good things happening in the community, but they aren't being funded.
There are wellbeing and mental health coaches in some, GP practices and in community organisations, but they just don't have the resources and the support to make them available, as widely as necessary.
Foundation Chief Executive Sean Robinson. A Hamilton farm worker says he and his boss had a lucky escape after 4 of their cows were hit by lightning and killed. Large parts of the North Island were hit by electrical storms today. More than 850 lightning strikes were recorded in Auckland this morning, with 130 reported in just 5 minutes. Dozens of flights at Auckland Airport were affected. Lightning strikes have also caused power outages in parts of rural Auckland, including Whangaparaoa, Piha and Helensville. Hamilton herd manager James Miles says it's lucky he wasn't hit.
Bloody lucky, to be honest. When I went down there and I took the video, I was a little bit shaken myself, and I rang the boss's wife when I got home and I said, I'm a bit bloody nervous to go outside. At the end of the day, it did clear up a bit, and then, of course, we've got a lot to do.
James Miles. A sports coach accused of sexually abusing one of his athletes is on trial in the Auckland District Court. The man, who has name suppression, has pleaded not guilty to 5 charges of sexual violation. He's accused of repeatedly forcing himself on one of his female athletes. Crown Prosecutor Hannah Clark said the man used his position to prey on the athlete.
Her success depended on him, and he knew he could take advantage of that. He was right, because for some time it was easier for her to go along with a lot of what he wanted than to kick up a fuss and compromise her career.
Hannah Clark. The man's defence is that the sexual activity was consensual. A political strategist is threatening more court action against the Hawke's Bay Regional Council after receiving an $8,000 bill for its legal costs. Havelock North man Simon Lusk filed a case in the Environment Court in August using evidence from a Waimarama farm he argued was damaging soils and groundwater in breach of council rules. Mr Lusk says he should not be liable for the council's legal costs after he withdrew the case.
I dropped the case when the ownership of the land changed, and I reached an amicable agreement with the landowner to stop the feedlotting. It had nothing at all to do with the regional council. They were still being negligent in enforcing their regulations, and the case still could be brought because they are still negligent.
Simon Lusk says if the council doesn't withdraw its request for payment, he'll file another case using evidence from another feedlot. The council says ratepayers should not have to foot the bill if Mr Lusk changes his mind. Nationals Deputy Leader Paula Bennett says she has total confidence in her colleague Maggie Barry, who's been the subject to accusations of bullying this week. Former staff have been anonymously contacting the media, saying the MP swore at staff, discussed their sexuality at work and asked them to do National Party work in her office. Ms Barry rejects the claims, saying 2 complaints were made, neither of which were upheld by the Parliamentary Service. Mrs Bennett is backing the North Shore MP.
Maggie is an outstanding MP that does a great job in her electorate and everything else, and as I do with all of the other MPs that I work with, of course I've got confidence in her.
Paula Bennett. The Association for Science Teaching in Primary Schools has blamed a focus on maths and reading for poor science results. A national study has found just 20% of children are reaching the expected level of achievement in science in their final year of primary and intermediate school, the worst outcome for any subject. Sandy Jackson from the Association of Primary Science Educators says she is not surprised.
I'm disappointed that it's that way, but I think I'm not really that surprised. The main reason is the focus in a lot of primary schools in the last few years is on literacy and numeracy, and science gets pushed to the side and not taught as much.
Sandy Jackson says teachers don't have time to improve their science teaching and schools are not devoting enough time to the subject. It's 5:05. Sport. The first awarding of a women's Ballon d'Or for football has been overshadowed by the winner being asked to twerk on stage after being handed the award. Norwegian striker Ada Hegerberg was honoured as the first female recipient of the award 62 years after Blackpool legend Stanley Matthews won the first male version of the prize. However, the host of the Paris event, DJ Martin Solveig, stunned the audience by asking Hegerberg to twerk on stage.
Est-ce que tu sais twerker?
No. I didn't consider it as a sexual harassment or anything. I was just happy to get a dance and celebrate winning the Ballon d'Or, to be honest.
The host has since apologised for his comments. Real Madrid's Croatia midfielder Luka Modric won the men's award, breaking Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi's decade-long hold on the trophy. Reports that Super Rugby will shrink from 15 to 14 teams as part of the next broadcast deal are speculative, and no decisions have yet been made over the size of the competition from 2021, says governing body SANZAAR. Super Rugby was cut from 18 to 15 teams last season, and a Sydney Morning Herald report has suggested a further reduction is on the cards, with Japan's Sunwolves facing the axe. The Black Caps are confident they're on their way to a competitive first innings total in the third and deciding cricket test against Pakistan in Abu Dhabi. New Zealand will resume on day 2 on 229 for 7. That's the news.
And I liked the character that he was wanting me to be. I kept my eyes open all the time. I kept my ears open all the time.
He says it's his land!
Looking for someone to share my adventure.
Where you going?
We're taking that card in for cargo, boy.
I'll drink to that.
He was one of those people that showed we can do it. He really kicked it off.
Geoff Murphy, 1938 to 2018.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, claims our exported plastic waste is being burned, not recycled. It is contaminating Malaysian villages. And after 10, moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt on the rise of call-out culture and its link to an increase in anxiety disorders among the young. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel fine apart from isolated showers, but widespread for a time tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty showers with thunderstorms and hail, clearing from the west this afternoon, then fine. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine, however a few showers today with thunderstorms. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa, including the Central High Country, also Nelson and Marlborough. Cloudy periods and scattered showers, some heavier from Manawatu southwards with isolated thunderstorms, hail and northwest gales in exposed places. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, scattered showers turning to widespread rain tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, showers with isolated thunderstorms and hail, downpours possible in Southland this afternoon. Showers turning to rain for a time this evening or tomorrow morning, possibly heavy. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle, heavy rain with possible thunderstorms tomorrow morning, clearing around midday. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. And I'm Lisa Owen. Our current mental health system is under-resourced, under pressure and unsustainable, according to a report released today by a mental health and addiction inquiry. And we can't medicate or treat our way out of this epidemic of mental distress. The report by a government-appointed panel makes 40 recommendations. They include increasing access to services from 3% of the population to 20% within 5 years, setting a suicide reduction target. Our rates are currently among the worst in the world, decriminalising drugs for personal use and introducing civil fines and treatment options instead, cracking down on the sale of alcohol by raising the drinking age and raising the price through more tax, reducing compulsory treatment orders and the use of seclusion, especially for Māori, and establishing a mental health and wellbeing commission to provide leadership and hold the government to account. In a moment we'll hear from Health Minister David Clark, but first the story of one of the more than 5,000 people who made submissions to the inquiry. Natasha Sadler's son Memphis died from a synthetic cannabis overdose. He was waiting more than 8 months for a bed in a rehab unit. Natasha told our producer Bridget Burke she knew her son was going to die, but she didn't have any medical help or the financial means to stop him.
My son died using synthetics. He died on my front porch while I was at work, and he was found by 2 of his 6 siblings unconscious and dead on our front porch.
Natasha Sadler describing the death of her son Memphis Pittman on November 10th last year. The 23-year-old started using synthetics on top of the medication he'd been prescribed for his schizophrenia.
He said to me, "Mum, the medicine's not working. This is the only stuff that turns the voices off." And I said, "But you've got to stop, son. It's going to kill you." It's killed others. 6 weeks prior to his death, 2 of his friends who were also users, they died. That alone wasn't enough to stop him from using. He continued to use. And I'd say to him, "You have to stop, son, or you will die. You'll break your mother's heart and you will die." And he said, "I want to stop, Mum, but I can't."
Natasha says Memphis waited 8 months for a bed in a rehabilitation facility.
On the week that he died, he made it to the top of the list of the rehab list. That's too long, because everywhere we went, we were told there were no beds unless I was willing to pay privately. I was willing, I just did not have the funds. A poor child died because there weren't enough beds.
And Memphis wasn't the only one.
The coroner reported that in the year that he died, 20 others also died as a result of using synthetics. I wonder how many of those 20 beautiful souls were also suffering from mental health issues that they couldn't get complete support for.
Natasha Sadler was one of more than 5,200 people to make submissions to the Mental Health Inquiry, calling for more funding for rehab for those who most desperately need it.
It's not enough to say that there just aren't enough beds. Close down prisons. Make beds available to get our people well.
The 44-year-old who suffered a stroke earlier this year has a message for the Health Minister. And she says not a day goes by when she doesn't wonder if things could have turned out differently.
What if they'd listened to me when I begged them, I won't name the provider, when I begged them to please put my son in the bed, otherwise he'd die. I had a knowledge of certainty that he would follow his friends because he just couldn't stop. And that drives a mother insane. I don't want other mothers in Aotearoa to feel that way. And if there's a way that can be prevented for one mum, for one child, find it. Kia kaha tātou. Look for solutions, not excuses, Mr. Clark.
And that is Memphis Pittman's mother, Natasha Sadler, speaking with our producer, Bridget Burke. Listening to that is Health Minister David Clark. He's described the inquiry's recommendations as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make real change. And he joins us now live from our parliamentary studio. Good evening, Minister. What assurances can you give people like Natasha Sadler that you will do everything in your power to make these recommendations a reality?
Good evening, Lisa. We have committed already to our next budget having as one of the key priority areas mental health and wellness. This government has already invested in its first budget earlier this year 200 million more into DHBs for responses. We've started a number of new programs, the Mana Ake program. We've rolled out further nurses in schools and so on. Just to illustrate, a number of steps have been taken, the most recent of which is the community services card rollout, which will mean 540,000 more New Zealanders
but what about
will get
these
access
new
to
recommendations?
affordable GP visits. Well, absolutely, Lisa. We're now working through those carefully but urgently because we want to make sure that we are lined up for the next budget round to make sure that we are responding to the report. It was deliberately kept as a shorter time frame for the report so that we would be able to work through carefully, but in time for the next budget, an appropriate response.
Because this report is actually asking you to make a funding proposal for next year's budget. Will you be able to do that?
I certainly will be pulling together funding proposals as a result of the report and in reference to the report. That was part of the way it was set up in our first 100 days. Some people called for a report that would have taken some years to complete. We weren't comfortable with that. We wanted to get the sector united and those who have grieved united in a response. I think that that's been achieved through the significant submissions and the way that that panel's worked very hard to pull together the voices that they've heard.
All right, the current target is 3% of the population having access to specialist mental health services. The report says it should be 20%. That is a massive increase. So what does that mean in terms of funding? Does it mean significantly more funding or just shifting resources around?
Well, look, I'm not able to make the considered response of the government today, but that's one of the significant recommendations in the report. It's true that this has been something that we've been hearing about, so some of the things we're doing already in terms of having a Talking Therapies pilot up and running this year are aimed at looking at ways in which we can start to make that care more accessible to people in primary health care settings in their communities, essentially, at the mild to moderate end. And that's one of the things that comes out really clearly in the report, that we need to look more broadly, not just at those who are at the hard end in really desperate situations, but those who are already presenting with concerns early on.
In 2015, 505 people died by suicide. A recommendation as the report is to reduce our number of suicides by 20% by 2030. Is that ambitious enough?
Well, I'm uncomfortable, I have to say. I'm on record already saying I'm uncomfortable saying any level of suicide is acceptable from my view. We'll look carefully at the report as a Cabinet. My Cabinet colleagues have not long received it and work through what our response is to each of the recommendations.
Do you commit to making a target, a reduction target though? Do you commit to making a reduction target?
I'm not committing today to a government response. We want to work through carefully. We want to recognise.
Why is
well, we
that?
want to do justice
sorry,
to the
Minister,
voices we've heard, Lisa.
Yeah. I just want to finish by saying you, during a debate in the lead up to the election on mental health issues, said that if you were in government, you would commit to an actual target. So here's your chance. Are you going to make that commitment?
Well, today I'm not going to commit the Cabinet to anything until we've had a chance to look at in detail at the findings. What I don't want to do particularly is commit us to anything without a plan as to how we're going to deliver on it. That would be empty rhetoric. It'd make great headlines, but we're actually concerned to make sure that we can deliver on the substance of this report. It is a really important report.
And I suppose the number would be the substance. I'm asking you if you agree in principle and would commit to making a reduction target.
As I've said in all media today, we are treating this with urgency, but we're working through the recommendations carefully so that we've actually got the methodology that we can back up anything we say we're going to do. We want to make sure that we're resourcing things appropriately, that we've got the systems in place for any responses that Cabinet agrees to.
Drugs and alcohol, we're still taking a punitive approach to their use, and this report recommends that personal use we should take a civil approach, recommend treatment or issue fines. That sounds sensible, doesn't it?
Yeah, one of the things that's in the report that's really clear, I mean, we've been hearing this from academics. This report brings the voice of the people to the fore and says those who are wrestling with addictions and mental health issues want a different approach to drugs as well. So we'll pick carefully through that, make sure that we are responding in a way that is adequate. But what's clear, I think, from the synthetics issue, and that was raised in the piece that played before I came into the interview, Lisa, is that as we've picked our way through that issue, the existing legislation makes it very difficult to distinguish between users and dealers, and that's an issue we're going to have to look at more closely.
And that's the interesting thing, because decriminalisation will require legislation. So how confident are you that you can get other parties on board, because you need them for this?
Well, what I have to say, across the coalition there has been really constructive conversations in the initial conversations around the way we treat drugs. Everybody, especially as we've wrestled with the synthetic issue, has been at the table saying we want to make sure this is treated as a health issue, because we can see that users and other vulnerable people are in a position, often often not of their own making, or if it was of their own making, from which they can no longer extract themselves. We've got to make a priority in providing the addiction services for people who come forward, but we also need to look at how we're set up now, because it's very difficult to make minor amendments to our current law that makes sense.
Yeah, but your coalition partners didn't sound too positive today about changing alcohol laws, and that is another area that has been singled out, saying that basically we're selling alcohol too cheaply, and past recommendations, including increasing the drinking age and increasing tax, have been ignored. Are you going to push ahead with those changes?
Again, I'm not announcing the government's response today, but we'll take those recommendations seriously. There are a number of recommendations on drugs and very specific ones around alcohol as well. We'll pick our way through those and make sure that any response we have is backed up by a plan of action that will actually deliver on.
The report says that there are groups with strong vested interests in stopping that happening. Do you think you are, well, brave and bold enough to stand up to those groups with a vested interest?
This government has been really clear. I mean, this is part of our 100-day plan launching this inquiry. We are committed to mental health and addiction and to significant change happening across our mental health and addiction sector. And so the public will be expecting to see change. We're not going to rush into it today. It's not going to be that we're announcing everything today. But I think this report and the work that's represented in it, when people get the chance to see it, will be regarded as significant, and a significant response will be expected from us.
Minister, just while we've got you here, Hill Morton Hospital, what is going on there? A number of serious, very serious assaults in recent days.
Yeah, I'm very concerned. I've been advised of these assaults. I understand that the DHB is meeting with the authorities around workplace safety. I think every nurse is no different from any other workplace. Every nurse should be expected to be safe in their workplace, and I'm deeply concerned by what I'm hearing.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That is Health Minister David Clark. A Hamilton farmer says he and his boss had a lucky escape after 4 of their cows were struck by lightning and killed. Thunderstorms lashed parts of the North Island this morning, particularly Auckland. More than 850 lightning strikes were spotted in Auckland skies, with 130 of those reported in just 5 minutes. Tom Furley reports.
Unreal. Could have been me. A video taken by herd manager James Miles at a farm on Onion Road just out of Hamilton shows 4 of his cows lying dead along the road, electrocuted by a bolt of lightning. Just minutes before, Mr. Miles had joked with his boss, the farm's owner, that maybe they should get his wife to pick them up.
Little did we know that maybe we shouldn't have been making those little jokes, because it very easily could have been one of our last trips up that race, because we're only 5 or 10 minutes away from following those cows. And then I get a call back from the boss saying that turn off the power as fast as you can. We've had four cows struck by lightning, and I hope that's it.
He says there didn't seem to be any burn marks on the cows, but they were all soaking wet. He says they've arranged for the cows to be picked up by a collection company, Wallace Corporation.
Bloody lucky, to be honest. When I went down there and I took the video, I was a little bit shaken myself, and I rang the boss's wife when I got home and I said, I'm a bit bloody nervous to go outside. At the end of the day, it did clear up a bit, and then, of course, we've got a lot to do. We've got bulls running around the farm, breaking fences and stuff, so we've got to tend to all that, whether it's rain, hail, snow, lightning, thunder.
Further north in Auckland, there were more than 1,800 lightning strikes recorded by the Met Service, 148 of which hit the ground.
I was shaking after. I was petrified.
That's how Amy Bunchiger describes the moment a lightning bolt hit a tree metres away from her Blockhouse Bay home this morning. She says no one at home, including her 2 budgies, was hurt by the strike, but it gave her a good fright.
Oh my gosh, it was so scary. I'm surprised my budgies didn't have a heart attack or something. Oh my gosh, it was so loud.
A woman was working at the Happy Campers campervan office in Mangere when the building was struck by lightning. Nobody from the office was prepared to comment this morning, other than to say the woman was okay and would spend the next few days at home with family. Jordan Swarbrick, who works next door, says when the lightning struck, it felt like an earthquake.
There was a couple strikes that were kind of right above us at that point that were shaking the building a bit. We had the power cords kind of swinging that are suspended from the roof. Almost like a little mini earthquake.
Mr. Swarbrick says at its peak the thunder was so loud he and his workmates donned earplugs. Air New Zealand says the storm caused significant disruption to both international and domestic services, and a number of flights have been cancelled. A number of Air New Zealand aircraft were also inspected because of possible lightning strikes. Lightning strikes have also caused power outages in parts of rural Auckland, including Whangaparaoa, Piha and Helensville. NEWA's Chris Brandolino says the wild weather broke the record for the wettest December hour in Auckland.
This is from Mangere, so down toward the airport. Our climate station recorded 31.4 millimeters earlier this morning, and that is good enough for the wettest December singular hour going back to 1965.
Mr Brandolino says the worst of the storm has passed and the weather in the region is expected to be better for the rest of the week. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
The man who steered New Zealand cinema through its coming of age in a bright yellow 1978 Mini is being remembered by his fans and collaborators. Legendary director Geoff Murphy died yesterday aged 80 and after a long illness. Murphy dominated the local movie landscape in the 1970s and 80s, creating classics like Goodbye Pork Pie, Utu and The Quiet Earth. And his colleagues and admirers say he built the stage that today's thriving industry still stands on. Rowan Quinn looks back at his life.
Where you going?
We're taking that car to Invercargill, boy.
I'll drink to that.
Goodbye Pork Pie, the car chase caper that showed Kiwi movies could be massive box office hits. A likely lad from Kaitaia steals a wallet, fraudulently rents a car, and to cut a long, funny story short, is on the run from the cops all the way to Invercargill. Director Gayleen Preston says audiences had never seen anything like it.
What Geoff was doing was inventing a new kind of Kiwi culture that wasn't polite, that was incredibly anti-establishment and good fun.
The movie made $1.6 million at the box office, huge money at the time, smashing records to become the first Kiwi movie to earn more than $1 million. But in an interview with RNZ's Wallace Chapman 3 years ago, Murphy said when the assessors were deciding whether to fund the film, they initially hated it.
In our day, you had to fight for what you wanted, and it was a real fight. It was like a fist fight. You had to bloody the other person's nose if you wanted something. Today, it's more like a pillow fight. So that sort of, we're here to help you, you know. Just sign here and do what we tell you to do.
As Murphy started out in the 1960s, movies were considered in peril. TV was seen as the new kid on the block, and many thought that Kiwis weren't interested in seeing themselves on screen. But through the dark masterpieces Utu and The Quiet Earth, plus Pork Pie and Never Say Die and many others, Murphy proved them wrong.
You know, we would thought, why shouldn't we have a film industry? Every other bloody country's got one. Even quite small countries, so there must be some ways of organising it so this is possible. We felt that if there weren't any New Zealand films, it was a sort of signal to New Zealand kids that we weren't quite up to it. We had to prove that wasn't true.
Friends today have been remembering the creative man who was part of the theatrical band Blurter and was a talented artist. But they say Murphy also liked to get stuck into the practical side of filmmaking. Through his Acme Sausage Company, he helped build the country's first camera crane and often helped build sets and rigs. His lifelong friend and frequent collaborator, the cinematographer Alan Bollinger, remembers the slogan he created for the crane.
He had a line, you know, getting New Zealand film off the ground. You know, I mean, it was literally in relation to our camera crane, but it was figuratively really what was happening too, I think.
Fellow director and friend Roger Donaldson says Murphy was invaluable in helping create the explosions and effects in the dystopian thriller Sleeping Dogs, something he was always interested in. He remembers shooting a commercial not far from the Auckland Central Police Station, which didn't quite go to plan.
There was an explosion much bigger than any of us expected, and not long after the explosion, the bomb squad came up the stairs and said, "Hey, what's going on here?" And Geoff said, "Well, we're just doing a few special effects for a commercial we're making." It surprised us too.
Alan Bollinger says Murphy caught up with many friends and family in October when he celebrated his 80th birthday. And while he'll be greatly missed, his influence will be felt for many years in New Zealand films. For Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn, DNA.
The National Party MP Maggie Barry has responded to bullying allegations by going on the offensive, asking the Parliamentary Service to investigate whether she was recorded by her staff. The North Shore MP says she is a respectful employer who provides a positive environment for her workers. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Former staff of Ms Barry say they were bullied and harassed, that the MP swore at them, discussed their sexuality at work and asked them to do National Party work in her office. Maggie Barry says in her entire time at Parliament there have been 2 complaints, which were both investigated by the Parliamentary Service and neither were upheld. She denies any allegations of bullying or harassment and invites those anonymously contacting the media to file formal complaints.
I do not accept that there has been bullying and harassment in my workplace. I would not approve of that at all, and I am not that kind of employer.
Ms Barry says she creates a positive environment for all staff.
I have high expectations of myself and of my staff, but I believe that you always treat people with respect, and that's what I've endeavoured to do in all of my workplaces over a long period of time.
She was asked about claims by former staff that she was toxic.
I disagree with it entirely. I'm not toxic, and if someone wants to come forward and say that I am, then let them do so, or take it through the appropriate channels. But, you know, it is a little odd and unfair having to answer allegations anonymously and also to be taped without my knowledge. I'm surprised that this sort of thing is happening, but I think if people feel strongly about it, they should take it through the proper channels, and that's through Parliamentary Services.
Maggie Barry says she never asked parliamentary staff to do National Party work, and she's very clear about what the rules are. Her colleague Paula Bennett totally backs her.
Maggie is an outstanding MP that does a great job in her electorate and everything else, and as I do with all of the other MPs that I work with, of course I've got confidence in her.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says his obligation is to make sure his party has the right culture, and he's confident it has.
I've had a discussion with Maggie Barry, and look, I think what I've satisfied myself about is that in National, we have the right culture. I've gone and seen Parliamentary Services about these issues. I've made clear to them what I expect and what they are doing about it. And now, of course, we've got this review that Trevor Mallard is leading, and I think that's a good thing.
What Simon Bridges, however, may not think is a good thing are more leaks that appear to be coming from within his own caucus. RNZ News and other media outlets received an anonymous text revealing details of internal polling presented to the caucus last week from someone claiming to be a National MP. It detailed internal polling showing the National Party on 41% and Labour on 44%. That was not as flattering as a recent public poll, but Mr Bridges is refusing to talk about it.
I'm not going to talk about internal polls. What we know is we've got a poll there that's public, that's 46%, that shows momentum. You can understand there'll be speculation and rumours. The Labour Party's been good at that lately on these things.
Simon Bridges does not accept the leak came from one of his own MPs. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
Coming up, why our Year 8 students are failing science, a dramatic warning from David Attenborough at the UN Climate Change Summit in Poland, and we're at the airport as the victorious under-17 women footballers touch down in New Zealand after an historic third-place finish at the World Cup. We would love your feedback on mental health, school science classes and the weather, or anything you'd like to talk to us about. You can get in touch via text on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The inquiry into mental health and addiction is recommending a massive expansion to mental health services. In their 200-page report released today, the authors conclude the system is failing to provide adequate services for most people suffering mental health or addiction problems. The report says most services focus on the top 3% of people with acute needs, but it recommends expanding that to 20%. Electrical storms across large parts of the North Island have killed livestock, cut power and disrupted flights today. More than 850 lightning strikes were recorded in Auckland this morning, 130 of them in just 5 minutes. Dozens of flights at Auckland Airport were affected and lightning strikes caused power outages in parts of rural Auckland. 4 cows were killed in a lightning strike outside Hamilton, and the herd manager says he was lucky not to be hit. A sports coach accused of sexually abusing one of his athletes is on trial in the Auckland District Court. The man, who has name suppression, has pleaded not guilty to 5 charges of sexual violation. He's accused of repeatedly forcing himself on a female athlete. His defence is that the sexual activity was consensual. Science teachers are blaming a focus on maths and English under national standards for primary schools' poor showing in their subject. The National Monitoring Study of Student Achievement says children in Year 8 do worse in science than any other subject, with only a fifth reaching the level expected last year. Teachers say science has suffered because of the emphasis on national standards in reading, writing and maths from 2010 until the end of 2017. Nationals Deputy Leader Paula Bennett says she has total confidence in her colleague Maggie Barry, who has been accused of bullying. Former staff have been anonymously contacting the media, saying the MP swore at staff discuss their sexuality at work and asked them to do National Party work in her office. Ms Barry rejects the claim, saying 2 complaints were made, neither of which were upheld by the Parliamentary Service. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's talk business now with Nona Peltier, who's joined us in the studio. Administrators of the failed RCR Tomlinson are talking to potential buyers for the New Zealand business. Now, these are the guys that were involved with the city rail link. So what does this all mean for that project?
Well, it looks like somebody will come along and buy up the New Zealand assets of the failed company, which hold a contract to build the CityLink service, and so that potentially could be business as usual come the new year, depending on who turns up to buy the company. So the administrators are looking at various offers. Apparently they've received quite a few. So there's some confidence that a new buyer will come in, take over the existing business, run it as a going concern, and everything will just carry on seamlessly. Now, we'll see whether or not that happens. It's a lot of ifs here.
Does that mean, do they if they buy the business, they get the contract?
Well, I suppose so.
That's the way they're talking.
It depends. I mean, certainly would be in everyone's interest if it carried on seamlessly. I mean, if you've got an interruption, it's going to cost more. But if you can continue working, then potentially that could be quite a good thing. So right now, the CityLink folks are working with the administrators and trying to get a resolution. And the existing the managers of the business in New Zealand are also working to find some resolution. So far we've got all the parties pulling together, and New Zealand assets are well sought after. So there would be potential buyers around looking at things. Yeah, of course the New Zealand dollar is rising, mind you, just saying.
We're getting a bit more expensive. Hey, the Christchurch-based construction company, Corbell, has collapsed, and I mean this seems like to be another one in recent days. Yeah, so what projects were they involved in?
Well, they were a Canterbury-based company, and they had done quite well there and wanted to expand, become a $100 million company, and moved into the Auckland market. Got some contracts here to work for the Ministry of Education on school projects and so forth. But they had some problems with a townhouse complex in Parnell, and the court ruled against them. I guess there was a lawsuit happening, and I don't know the details of that, but the bottom line is they lost. And when they lost, they basically lost their shirt with it, so they couldn't carry on. And so now the Ministry of Education is, again, working with the administrators of that particular company, hoping to find a resolution so that those projects carry on. And I think the projects were worth something like $35 million.
So a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of
question
money. Question marks, always question marks when these things happen. We don't have an answer, though. For just more questions.
Yeah. And what about the market, the rest of the market? What's been going on?
It's interesting. Our market was doing really well today, but towards the end, it turned kind of sour. So it ended down just a tiny bit, like 10 points only. So that's not even a whole percent, 0.1%. 10 points down to, 8,866. Now, compared that with Australia, that was down 1%. Asia turned sour because the deal that potentially could be on the table between China and the U.S. might not be anything to get excited about at this stage. But our dollar strengthened, never mind, and we are trading at 69.5 U.S. cents. That's quite a lot. 94.3 Australian, again, it's a good number, and 54.6 British pence. So we'll see what happens next.
Thank you, Nona. And let's turn now to high schools and science, actually. High school science teachers say they're alarmed that most students are arriving with a substandard science education, and it could have dire consequences. Results from the National Monitoring Study of Student Achievement show that by the time children finish Year 8, they are doing worse in science than any other subject, with just 20% reaching the expected level of achievement. Science educators say science loses out to numeracy and literacy in New Zealand schools, but the country needs a science literate population more than ever. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The study asked children to explain why water flow in a river might spike on a particular day and to use scientific reasoning to figure out what might be inside a sealed ice cream container. It found most 8-year-olds were doing well in science last year, but most 12-year-olds were not, with just 1 in 5 reaching the curriculum levels expected of their age group. That shocked Chris Duggan from Science Education Trust, the House of Science, who says teachers had been hoping for a better result since the last time pupils were tested 5 years ago.
The Year 4s have improved slightly, but the Year 8s, it's still really, really bad. To look at that and see that 80% of our Year 8s are going into secondary school with insufficient science to allow secondary teachers to start teaching where they should, that's a real worry.
Chris Duggan says the results have huge implications for society.
As a nation, we need a population that has some basic level of scientific literacy that can look at the world through scientific lenses. And without that, we're in trouble. We end up with people making uninformed decisions about themselves, which is not good, but even for their family, for society, and eventually the economy and the whole planet suffers.
Sandy Jackson from the Association for Primary School Science Educators says New Zealand is going to struggle if it doesn't produce enough scientists and people who understand the discipline.
For our country, research and development is enormous. You can see that it can bring in a lot of money, but if we're not encouraging students to go that way, to learn the science that's needed to do that, we'll have a lack of scientists, and it will affect the country's ability to go forward in the future.
Sandy Jackson says teachers don't have time to improve their science teaching, and schools are not devoting enough time to the subject.
I'm disappointed that it's that way, but I think I'm not really that surprised. The main reason is the focus in a lot of primary schools in the last few years is on literacy and numeracy, and science gets pushed to the side and not taught as much.
Many Year 8 children are at intermediate schools, and Jonathan Treadray from the Association of Intermediate and Middle Schools says the result is worse than they had expected. He says science might be getting lost in project-based learning that covers several subjects at once, but teachers' confidence is also a problem.
It's definitely teacher expectations, teacher knowledge. A lot of teachers don't have innate knowledge of the science, so it's self-perpetuating. They've come through school with a bit scared of science or not knowing the wonderful values of science, and so they haven't felt confident teaching in themselves.
Chris Duggan says most primary teachers don't have science degrees, but that shouldn't matter.
Science in primary schools doesn't have to be, rocket science or brain surgeon type stuff. It's skills-based, and it's really engaging, and the kids love it. But I've heard over and, time and again that primary teachers lack the confidence and lack the resources to deliver meaningful hands-on science lessons.
So it's not rocket science, but so far most Kiwi 12-year-olds aren't even getting a basic grade from the National Monitoring Study. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
He was exposed to violence at an early age, a teenage gang member at the age of 12, and then joined Black Power at 16, before going on to join another gang. That was the turbulent upbringing and life of Roli Heke, who has been jailed for just under 7 years for shooting at police near Morrinsville last year, and then going on the run for 12 days. The 7 years will be served on top of another 5 years Heke received for manufacturing and supplying meth. The 38-year-old was sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton, and our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was there.
After being stopped for speeding in August last year, Heke fired on 3 police officers using a military-style rifle, hitting one police car. The officers took cover and returned fire, but Heke was able to slip away and was eventually tracked down to Kaingaroa. It turns out he was on bail awaiting sentence on the drugs charges, but had cut off his electronic monitor. Crown Prosecutor Ross Douch described Heke's actions as posing a serious risk to both the community and police.
It would be viewed by members of the public, sir, as outrageous that
Police officers going about what they envisage to be a routine traffic stop find themselves under fire from a military-style weapon at close range. Unforgivable and requiring the sternest denunciation and deterrence.
Hickey's lawyer Bill Lawson told the court that while it's easy to say Hickey had a choice of a life of crime or not, he did face some systemic deprivation growing up. He says Hickey moved around many times as a child and came under the influence of his gang member father and was brought up around drugs and alcohol.
Having seen what Mr Hickey has seen and the male role model in his life continuing to follow those movements, it must have been incredibly difficult for him to form some stable connections.
Justice Fosso queried why Hickey had shown no remorse for his actions against the police.
So I'm left with an impression that Mr Hickey's focal point really is his whānau and his community, and not the police and their families.
I can't get into the mind, as you know, sir, of the report writer.
So you've got no other information to help me on that?
Unfortunately not, sir.
The court heard that Hickey did have a period of stability in his life after finding his Maori dimension and becoming involved in kapa haka for a number of years. But a relationship breakdown put him back on a criminal path, getting involved in methamphetamine dealing.
It really does test a judge's capacity for mercy when you see that type of change in behaviour. Your submission is very powerful up until we get to the point that we have someone who did make a change already and then reverted back.
Justice Fosso told Hickey that he had the capacity, when in the right environment, to be a productive member of society.
I cannot ignore, however, that your decisions to engage in very serious criminal activity, including methamphetamine dealing, absconding from Ian bail, and shooting at police officers whose duty is to protect the public, were made as a mature adult who had already reconnected to Te Ao Māori.
Hickey faces a cumulative sentence of just over 12 years in jail, with a minimum non-parole period of 3 years and 5 months. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
And in breaking news, we've got an update on the New Zealand Transport Agency compliance issues. Obviously, this is the ongoing saga with a lot of cars being recalled to have their warrants of fitness reassessed because some garages have been issuing dodgy warrants. They have issued another suspension notice for a vehicle inspector. Elia Sapaya has had his inspection licence revoked. That is from Al's Auto Services in East Tamaki, Auckland. This is because he apparently has a long history of non-compliance, including rushed inspections and failing to identify issues with brakes, seatbelts and corrosion. So this is another case where apparently the Transport Agency has known for some time that there has been an issue with this particular inspector. Now, they are now contacting almost 4,000 vehicle owners to go and get their cars rechecked. They'll be issuing vouchers to do that. Now, just doing a quick mental tally, I think that brings us up to about 14,000 vehicles through various garages and inspectors that now need to go back through and have their warrants checked again. NZTA says they will make no further comment on this alert. And obviously that comes off the back of Dargaville diesel specialists getting their licence suspended after a car they gave a warrant to was involved in a crash that turned fatal after one of the seat belts failed. One of the world's most famous naturalists has delivered a dramatic warning at the UN Climate Change Summit in Poland. David Attenborough says if action isn't taken on climate change, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. He was chosen to represent the world's people in addressing delegates of almost 200 nations who are in the city of Katowice to negotiate how to turn pledges made in the 2015 Paris climate deal into reality. The BBC's David Shookman reports.
It's been a year of deadly fires and record heat, and also new warnings from scientists about the dangers of living in a world of rising temperatures.
We all know what's good.
A social media campaign has gathered voices from around the world calling on governments to take action.
Please welcome Sir David Attenborough.
The campaign spokesman was given a rare chance to appeal directly to this global forum.
Right now,
We're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
There was applause, but not much. Maybe because tackling climate change is so difficult. Poland, like many countries, depends on coal. We went down a mine to see the grim process of getting it out. Thousands here think a green future threatens their jobs. What would you say to a Polish coal miner about his future, given what's being discussed here in this conference?
Well, all you can say is that things change. There's a process of history which is now moving to its end. And you will have to find, your children will have to find new ways of living.
So as the conference continues, there'll be some tense arguments over what to do. Stronger storms and the sea level rising are growing threats. Small island states feel the most vulnerable.
What kind of effort must be put into rebuilding when your entire economy is wiped away? Imagine what if the entire economy of Ireland or England was washed away? Where would you start? And that is the reality of climate change.
Tomorrow is a special holiday for miners here. And although they're celebrating, they're angry about the talks. At this conference, one miner told us the ecologists should take a look at themselves and ask who contributes more to the world, them or the miners. But as the evening coal fires burn, each one pollutes the air. Scientists say this must be phased out. It'll be a huge challenge.
David Schuckman reporting there from the UN Climate Change Summit in Poland. A Norwegian player has won football's inaugural Ballon d'Or for women, but her victory has been overshadowed by an inappropriate comment made on stage. The incident has lit up Twitter and resulted in a public apology. Elizabeth Brown has more.
Prosecutor Hannah Clark opened the Crown's case this afternoon, telling the jury
Ada Hegerberg plays for her country and also helped lead her French club side Lyon to win the Women's Champions League last season. Those achievements earned the 23-year-old the first ever Ballon d'Or for football's top woman player. The Ballon d'Or is presented by France Football and is one of the sport's most prestigious prizes. Hegerberg accepted the award with a special message to young women.
It's a huge step for women's football, and the work you put down is such an important thing for women's football, and together we'll make a difference. I would like to end this speech with some words to young girls all over the world. Please believe in yourself. Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
But as she enjoyed the victory, there was this.
Et on s'est dit qu'on allait faire un truc un peu comme ça. Est-ce que tu sais twerker?
Non.
The French DJ Martin Solveig, who was co-hosting the ceremony, had asked her if she knew how to twerk to celebrate her victory. Hegerberg looked visibly embarrassed and disappointed, but reluctantly agreed to dance to another song before leaving the stage. It didn't take long for social media to light up, with critics attacking Solveig for his inappropriate remark. Tennis star Andy Murray was among them, calling the incident another example of the ridiculous sexism in sport. But speaking after the ceremony, Hegerberg played down the remarks and said she hadn't taken any offence.
He came to me after and he was really sad that it went that way. I didn't think about it in that moment. I didn't consider it as sexual harassment or anything. I was just happy to celebrate winning the Ballon d'Or, to be honest.
Martin Solveig himself hurried onto Twitter to post an apology.
I'm a little bit amazed, astonished by what I'm reading on the internet. I, of course, didn't want to offend anyone. This comes from a distortion of my English level and my English culture level, which is not, obviously not enough, because this was a joke, probably a bad one, and I want to apologize for the one I may have offended. Sorry about that.
Meanwhile, Croatia and Real Madrid midfielder Luka Modric was awarded the Ballon d'Or for men. It was the first time in 10 years that the prize has not gone to Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, aho.
The victorious under-17 women footballers say the magnitude of their World Cup bronze is only starting to sink in. The team touched down shortly after dawn, the glow of their World Cup medals lighting up an otherwise miserable morning. It's the first New Zealand team to ever reach the final four at a Football World Cup. Sports reporter Clay Wilson was among family and friends greeting the players at Auckland Airport.
One team, New Zealand. One team, New Zealand. One team, New Zealand. One team, New Zealand.
Arms linked in a tight circle after arriving home from Uruguay this morning, the New Zealand under-17 women's football team gathered for one final celebratory chant before parting ways. It was a reflection of a tight team bond that had been so obvious as they held off Canada on Sunday to clinch their country's first World Cup bronze medal. And midfielder Maya Hahn says that togetherness had been crucial to that history-making performance.
We all feel comfortable with each other and get along well, and then on the field we're like super supportive. Like we're one team, it's not the bench and the starters, it's like the bench is supporting the starters throughout, and then everyone's sort of on board with the concepts and everything. And I think the fact that we have support for each other and we're willing to give 100% all the time, that's definitely the underlying reason why we've gotten so far.
The team have rightly earned plenty of plaudits for their outstanding efforts. So much so, they were in more demand upon arrival than Kiwi boxing star Joseph Parker, who touched down in Auckland less than an hour later ahead of his latest fight in Christchurch next weekend. Hahn says all the adulation was still taking some getting used to.
It's pretty surreal. I mean, we've been away for like over a month now, and it's pretty crazy. It's nice to hear the accent again, and like the positive reception's been pretty unreal. Definitely not expected, especially because it was such a, I guess, a surprising result for us. But yeah, it's super cool.
Just reaching the semi-finals had well exceeded their initial goal to simply get out of their pool. Forward Maggie Jenkins, one of two team members to already have played for the senior national women's side, says what it meant to have a bronze medal hanging from her neck could not be understated.
The medal's just amazing, like it just means everything, like it's a memory that we're just going to have forever and ever, and I just treasuring this moment so much, and I think everyone on the team is really enjoying this so much, and I can't wait to hang it on the wall.
Coach Leon Burney says the impact of their achievements was already being felt.
The amount of emails I've had from people that I've met or not met and just saying, oh, my daughter now wants to be like Kelly Brown and scoring out the box, or we're definitely playing football next year. It's been incredible, like it's been so touching, and it's just really good to see.
While he's still in celebration mode for now, Burney believes it's key football in this country capitalises on his team's success. After a troubled period which included the resignation of Football Ferns coach Andrea Saraf, Burney hopes this can be a launching pad to take New Zealand football back to brighter times.
You've got some great role models here that are spread right across the country, like utilise those, utilise them next year when junior football starts, get them down to junior football day and registration day and get their profile out there and keep inspiring the next group of players or the younger players to come in, and I think that's the important part that we need to do now, not just it ends here, like carry that momentum on.
As for his own players, Burney says success at the Under-20 World Cup and beyond is well within their reach. Hahn already has a scholarship locked in at the University of Oregon, while star goalkeeper Anna Leet is returning home via America with the hope of joining her teammate in a US collegiate system. Despite being the youngest member of the team, Macy Fraser knows exactly what this success means for every player in the squad.
Honestly, I think it's inspired the whole team. Like, we never thought a little country like New Zealand would place in the top 3 at a World Cup. So yeah, it's a big part of, like, I guess the next things that will come for us.
A much needed reason for New Zealand football fans to once again be looking forward with optimism. Moti hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
And time now for some of your feedback. We returned to a story earlier in the show, which is about the mental health inquiry. The panel has released its report. It's got 40 recommendations. Among them are making alcohol more expensive and raising the drinking age. This one from D. Allen says, yes, raise the sale of alcohol from 18 back to 20 or even go to 21. In terms of the so-called war on drugs, this texter says, end the war on drugs now. It's a failed pursuit driven by hysteria, causing untold harm and death year after year. Focus on health, harm prevention and education. Quit criminalising and killing our people now. That is another of the 40 recommendations to make personal use of illegal drugs a civil issue and a health issue, so fines and referral to treatment. Fred, though, has a different view. He says we really need to collectively review our liberal attitudes to all mind-altering substance use. The culture of blaming others for what lays within our own sphere of effective influence should not be tolerated, says Fred. This one says, hi Lisa, while I feel some empathy for Memphis's mum, my own son has had mental health issues. It is not up to the health system to fix all the woes of people who decide to use and abuse chemical substances. The person has to hit rock bottom and decide for themselves or herself to take steps to get well. And that is from Caroline. Do keep your feedback coming.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The mother of a man who died from a drug overdose while waiting 8 months for a rehab bed says it's time the government took real action to improve mental health services. Natasha Sadler's 23-year-old son, Memphis, who had schizophrenia, died from a synthetic cannabis overdose in November last year. She was one of more than 5,200 people to make submissions to the Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry, which released its report today. The inquiry made 40 recommendations, including establishing a Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission. Ms Sadler told Checkpoint she begged a health provider to take in her son, but it was too late.
That drives a mother insane. I don't want other mothers in Aotearoa to feel that way. And if there's a way that can be prevented for one mum, for one child, find it. Kia kaha tātou. Look for solutions, not excuses, Mr Clark.
Natasha Sadler. Almost 4,000 people will need their warrants of fitness checked after the Transport Agency suspended an Auckland vehicle inspector. The agency served a suspension notice on Ilya Sapaya and his company Els Auto Services in the suburb of East Tamaki this afternoon. It says Mr Sapaya has a long history of non-compliance, including rushed inspections and failing to identify problems with brakes, seatbelts and corrosion. The agency says some vehicles may have been wrongly given warrants and it plans to contact all the affected owners. The government has approved an extra $22.5 million for the America's Cup. The Economic Development Minister, David Parker, says the extra money follows higher than forecast costs for wave breaks and dredging works, and also Friday's announcement of 8 additional Cup Challenger applications. This will take the government's contribution to the Auckland waterfront development to almost $137 million. The extra funding is subject to the Auckland Council also agreeing to increase its contribution. The council says it's considering providing another $14.5 million and will discuss the matter on Thursday. It's estimated the 2021 Cup Regatta will bring in between $550 million and $1 billion to the economy. A coroner is likely to make adverse comments about the death of an elderly Wellington woman whose repeated medical alarm calls went unanswered. Kala Nanagara today held an inquest into the death of Patricia Smith in Wellington Hospital in September 2014. Anne-Marie May reports.
Patricia Smith shared an alarm base unit with her brother-in-law who lived at the same property, but they both had individual Freedom medical alarm pendants. After falling out of bed and breaking several bones, she pressed her alarm, but ambulance officers left her home after her brother-in-law told them he had not sought help. She continued pressing her pendant repeatedly, and a second ambulance visited, but again left after speaking to her brother-in-law. Miss Smith eventually managed to call 111 and was taken to hospital, but died 2 days later. Paul Fake from the Wellington Free Ambulance Trust says a more intelligent system is now in place, so staff are aware if more than one patient is sharing an alarm base unit. This is Anne-Marie May.
A Hamilton farm worker says he and his boss were lucky to escape a lightning strike that killed 4 of their cows today. Large parts of the North Island have been hit by electrical storms, with more than 850 lightning strikes in Auckland this morning. Dozens of flights at Auckland Airport were affected, and the storm also cut power in parts of rural Auckland, including Whangaparaoa, Piha and Helensville. Hamilton herd manager James Miles says it's lucky he wasn't hit. A political strategist says he should not have to pay the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's legal costs after withdrawing a case against it in the Environment Court. Havelock North man Simon Lusk argued the intensive farming at a Waimarama feedlot was damaging soils and groundwater in breach of the council's own rules. But he withdrew the case after the farm's new owners agreed to stop the practice. The council's regulation manager Liz Lambert says ratepayers should not foot the $8,000 legal bill.
As the defendants have had to spend money preparing the case to go to court. And then Mr Lusk withdrew the declaration before it was heard by a judge. We feel that we owe it to the ratepayers to try and at least recoup the external costs that have been incurred.
Liz Lambert. Simon Lusk says he may take a case against the council relating to another feedlot. A 7-year-old American boy who reviews toys has been revealed as YouTube's highest earning star. Forbes estimates Ryan of Ryan Toys Review raked in more than $22 million for the 12 months to June. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Welcome to Ryan Toy Review.
Since Ryan's channel was set up by his parents in March 2015, his videos have had almost 26 billion views and amassed 17.3 million followers. Forbes says his earnings are generated by advertising shown before videos, with the remainder coming from sponsored posts. It also says they've doubled compared to the previous year. The toys featured in Ryan's videos can sell out instantly, and in August, Walmart signed him up to sell an exclusive range of toys and clothing called Ryan's World. Asked once why he thinks his videos are such a success, Ryan replied, "Because I'm entertaining and funny." Call Elizabeth Brown, aho.
We're in the wrong job. It's almost 6:06. Sport, the Black Caps are confident they're building a competitive first innings total in the third and deciding cricket test against Pakistan in Abu Dhabi. New Zealand will resume on day 2 on 229 for 7, with BJ Watling unbeaten on 42 and debutant Will Somerville 12 not out. Opener Jeet Raval scored 45 on the opening day and says the pitch is already breaking up.
If we can get 250 plus, it'll be awesome. But the boys did a fantastic job. BJ and Will Somerville on his debut. So look, it's awesome to see, and hopefully we can carry that good work on.
Jeet Raval play is set to resume at 7 o'clock. The Warriors have moved to shut down talk. Brisbane halfback Cody Nikarima is headed to Auckland after speculation the Kiwi playmaker may replace Cronulla recruit Sean Johnson. The Warriors have repeated their priority is to look within to replace Johnson in the halves in 2019 with an untested playmaker or utility, Peter Hiku, a possible partner for Blake Green. Stephen Adams is continuing his impressive season in the NBA, leading the Oklahoma City Thunder to a resounding 110-83 road win over the Detroit Pistons. Adams scored a game-high 21 points to ensure the Thunder remain in touch with the leaders in the Western Conference. Real Madrid's Croatian midfielder Luka Modric has been named winner of the 2018 Ballon d'Or, breaking Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi's decade-long hold on the prestigious World Player of the Year award. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Elliot Childs and Kirsten Johnstone sample a few new albums in Nick Bollinger's absence. We have a window on the entrepreneurial world of new migrants. Trevor Reiki chats with Tui Mamaku, one of the brains behind the global but very local sounds of the Mamaku project, and Eric Brenstrom drops by with a global weather report. Expect showers on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we have an updated Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty fine apart from isolated showers. Showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, a few showers clearing this evening. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa, including the central high country, also Nelson and Marlborough. Isolated showers becoming more widespread this evening, some heavier from Taranaki southwards, with isolated thunderstorms and hail possible in northwest gales and exposed places. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, isolated showers turning to widespread rain tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, showers with isolated thunderstorms and hail. Downpours possible in Southland this afternoon. Showers turning to rain for a time tonight and tomorrow morning, possibly heavy. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle, heavy rain with possible thunderstorms tomorrow morning, clearing around midday. It's 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina, and I'm Lisa Owen. The Health Minister is promising there will be big change in the mental health sector following the release of the country's largest ever inquiry into the issue. But David Clark wasn't prepared to commit today to a suicide reduction target or changes to alcohol or drug laws. Those are just some of the 40 recommendations in the report, which paints a grim picture of the state of mental health and addiction in New Zealand. Here's political reporter Gia Garrick.
After more than 5,000 submissions, the Mental Health Inquiry has concluded the system is severely inadequate and a lot needs to change. For starters, it wants a target set to reduce suicide rates by 20% by 2030, citing the 20,000 people who attempt suicide every year as far too many. Christchurch woman Sarah Killow, who has used both inpatient and outpatient mental health services for many years, says that's not ambitious enough.
I think a 90% reduction would be far better. I mean, we're talking about kids that are not even at school yet, in 2030 could be in the age of looking at suicide, and it's like we don't want that. We want to aim for as high as we can get.
The Health Minister, David Clark, says he's considering everything but won't make any commitments until next March.
I don't think any level of suicide is something that we should be accepting at face value. But I'm not announcing a response today. I want to work carefully through the report and the recommendations because they're grounded in the voices of the people and also in the consultation that's happened with those working on the ground in the sector.
One of the most controversial aspects of the report is the suggestion stricter laws are needed around alcohol. It slams New Zealanders' alcohol consumption, saying it's the most common addictive substance, with 1 in 5 New Zealanders drinking classified as hazardous. It recommends increasing the price of alcohol, raising the purchasing age to 20 and reducing the opening hours of licensed premises. They may be hard changes for Labour and the Greens to get across the line with its coalition partner if the reaction of the New Zealand First MP Shane Jones is anything to go by.
I'm living proof that you do stupid things when you drink too much, but having said that, I don't buy into the idea that it's a social cancer.
The inquiry's report also controversially suggests criminal sanctions be dropped for the possession of controlled drugs for personal use and replaced with fines or treatment programs instead. The Greens' Chloe Swarbrick has long campaigned on treating drug addiction as a health issue and is confident the coalition government will make good on its promises for change.
I found New Zealand First to be incredibly reasonable when looking at the research and actually working towards the betterment of outcomes and wellbeing for New Zealanders.
The report also talks of establishing new oversight bodies, including a Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission to act as a watchdog. It wants the Mental Health Act reformed, a massive expansion to and greater funding of existing services, and a greater focus on helping Māori and Pacifica people access them. And it recommends politics be put to one side and parties begin working collaboratively on solutions. The head of the Mental Health Foundation, Sean Robinson, warns the government against choosing the easy or politically safe path when it responds.
The government cannot cherry-pick this. It can't just say, oh, we'll make some more counselling available, we'll do a few small things, and then we'll have finished and we can forget about this. The thrust of this report is for a fundamental transformational change where we move away from thinking of mental health as psychiatric illness to thinking of it as the well-being of the community.
Currently, up to 80% of New Zealanders experience mental distress or addiction challenges or both during their lifetime. The goal of any change is to ensure they're not dealing with that alone. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
And we're getting a lot of feedback on this issue. This texter says, my brother-in-law is bipolar and when on medicine he's okay, but then he stops taking it as soon as he is well. It results in causing family a lot of heartache as there is no bed free and he could harm himself or someone. And his aged parents have a living nightmare. We need hospital to look after them and who can stop them walking out when they are deemed unwell mentally. Rachel has texted us to say, I can't believe the previous government members are blaming the present mental health problems on the present government. Why was the national government unable to fund? I am fed up, she says, aged 70, with left-wing governments being left to pick up the costs of right-wing governments' refusals to help through social spending. About time we accepted that all of us are responsible for seeing all of us find New Zealand God's own. He must be tearing his hair out now over our selfishness, says Rachel. Thank you for your feedback. Keep it coming. 2101 on the text. A Malaysian woman who is disgusted at the amount of New Zealand plastic being sent to her country for so-called recycling has arrived in Auckland to try and stop it at the source. RNZ revealed in September that millions of tonnes of New Zealand's plastic was being sent to Malaysia, where it is often burned or dumped by illegal recycling factories. After the story broke, the Malaysian government moved to try and tighten regulations around plastic imports, bringing in a small tax and vowing to shut down operators flouting the rules. But since then, New Zealand has sent 1 million more tonnes of plastic to Malaysia, and those on the ground say the situation isn't improving. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Munro have the story.
The shores of Mangere Bridge are a long way from Lei Pingpua's home in Malaysia. She didn't ever expect to come to New Zealand, but as mountains of the world's plastic pollute her hometown, she's ventured out to see where it's all coming from.
They are not sent out for recycle, actually they are sent out for dumping. And we really don't want to be a dumping site of the other countries.
Ms. Pua first noticed plastic factories popping up in her hometown at the start of the year. They began operating after China banned plastic imports. The factories in Malaysia are mostly illegal. They claim to be recycling, but are burning and dumping huge amounts of plastic which is too contaminated or too expensive to recycle.
We see our children suffering, our elderly suffering from a very serious problem like coughing, like asthma. And gradually the cancer rate increasing. We hope we can do something for our country and for our people.
I met Lei Pingpua in September when she showed me around one of the factories. Since then, she's been working round the clock to raise the alarm about the devastating impact they're having. Now Greenpeace has brought her to Aotearoa for a speaking tour with the aim of getting New Zealanders to better understand the impact their plastic is having elsewhere.
What they throw out actually go to waste. Actually, it turns to very dangerous and very harmful to ourselves. So we should try to minimize or even stop using most of the single-use plastic.
When the Malaysian government began taxing plastic imports several months ago, Ms. Pua hoped it would help curb the problem. But she says as long as New Zealand and other countries have plastic to send, her country and other developing nations will take it. In the first 8 months of this year, New Zealand sent nearly 6,000 tonnes of plastic to Malaysia. In September, the government asked recyclers here to carefully consider what was happening to the plastic exports they sent offshore. But since then, nearly 1,000 more tonnes has gone to Malaysia with no guarantees about what's happening to it when it gets there. The Associate Environment Minister Eugenie Sage didn't want to be interviewed for this story. She referred us to the Ministry for the Environment, who issued a statement which said there were no plans at this stage to restrict plastic exports, and instead they would be focusing on investing in recycling facilities here in New Zealand.
We should reduce, reuse and recycle and try to minimize our use of plastic, because we are going to kill by ourselves by our these so-called technology that to provide us convenience lifestyle. Convenient lifestyle, actually we pay more to our next generation's health and our environment.
Lei Pingpua says enough is enough and both countries need to clean up their act to stop the situation getting any worse. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
A sports coach accused of sexually abusing one of his athletes has gone on trial in Auckland. The man, who has name suppression, has pleaded not guilty to 5 charges of sexual violation relating to alleged offences in Auckland and Christchurch. Annika Smith has been in the Auckland District Court.
Prosecutor Hannah Clark opened the Crown's case this afternoon, telling the jury it was about an abuse of trust.
This trial is about the defendant abusing that position and his place in the community to sexually offend against her.
Ms Clark said the defendant, who cannot be named due to a suppression order, began grooming the complainant when she was a teenager. She said he took an immediate interest in her, and their relationship soon progressed from professional to personal. When the woman took the stand, she described how the man took her out for lunches, bought her jewellery and texted her every day. She said things turned sexual one night in December 2016. The pair were sitting in his car after having dinner together when the man, who was nearly 40 years older than her, tried to kiss her. She said she asked him what he was doing, but he told her to just go with it. The woman said he groped her chest and forced her to perform oral sex on him. Crown Prosecutor Hannah Clark said this happened on a number of occasions, on trips away from home and even abroad. She said the woman finally broke down during one of these trips and told another coach, who contacted the police. In her opening address, the prosecutor said the jury may wonder why she didn't tell someone sooner. She said the woman had a lot of respect for her coach and knew much of her sporting success depended on their relationship.
Her success depended on him, and he knew he could take advantage of that. He was right, because for some time it was easier for her to go along with a lot of what he wanted than to kick up a fuss and compromise her career.
Defence lawyer Graham Newell said his client didn't dispute that the sexual activity had occurred, but said it was consensual. Mr Newell said the woman appeared to enjoy the attention and appreciate any advantages it may have given her.
The short point being, whatever you make of their ages, as a matter of fact, the defence position is that this sexual activity involved 2 consenting adults.
The trial before Judge Nicola Mathers and a jury continues. In Auckland for Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
America's former First Lady Michelle Obama has admitted she still suffers from imposter syndrome, despite 8 years in the White House and as an advocate for women and girls around the world. She's been in London promoting her memoir, Becoming, where thousands gathered to hear her speak. And she also returned to a girls' school, which she visited 9 years ago, and credits for helping to spark her ongoing work on girls' education. The BBC's Adina Campbell followed her visit.
As they queued outside in the cold, expectations were high.
I think I'm just really excited to be here. I think what she represents, what she's achieved in her own right, without her association with her husband, I think is really powerful.
We've got a family, and a young family, and to see a black family in the White House is empowering for us.
Once inside, Michelle Obama was welcomed with rapturous applause in front of an audience of nearly 3,000 people.
Wow!
During the 90 minutes conversation, fans of Michelle Obama heard her talk about a number of issues, but her main message was about empowerment.
We assume that working class folks are not highly gifted in their own right, when a lot of times your station in life is limited by the circumstances that you find yourself in.
How was it?
It was
great. Like, she was very witty. She was like, when someone would say a joke, she would just be automatically just on the ball, always ready.
It's just very unique. Like, you don't get the opportunity every day to see Michelle Obama, the First Lady, and she's so empowering and great in her own way, and it's just amazing to know that we as young people got that opportunity.
Did anyone get really emotional while they were
We still read.
And earlier today, Mrs. Obama revisited a school in North London, a place where she says she was first inspired to focus on education during her time as the First Lady.
It gives me a level of focus and determination in the work that I do when I get to see you all up close. And as I said then, you remind me of me and all the fears and all the challenges that you face.
It's not just these girls who are inspired by Michelle Obama's personal story. Her journey from a working-class neighborhood in Chicago all the way to the White House has captivated millions of people all over the world.
It was really good and inspiring. It was just so amazing to see Michelle Obama up so close.
And how did you find today's assembly?
It was really inspiring to look up to her as a role model and to remember the past memories that she created with us in our school.
A role model for girls past and present. She may no longer be the First Lady, but Michelle Obama continues to be an inspiration for many.
Dina Campbell there in London, and Michelle Obama had to cut her visit to London and Europe short to return to the US for the funeral for the former President George Bush Sr. An Auckland teenager was left shaking and terrified after lightning struck just metres from her bedroom window during a massive storm that rolled through Auckland this morning. Amy Banchiga, who lives in Blockhouse Bay, was woken by the thunder and lightning around 8:30. Now, if you witnessed any of this morning, it was a pretty impressive light show. Amy, though, managed to film the very scary moment that the lightning hit, causing a tree to catch on fire. She spoke to our reporter Nita Blake-Person about what happened, and if you're watching, you'll be able to see Amy's amazing video.
The thunder and lightning woke me up, and I thought, well, I'm awake now, so I may as well try get something on video. And I ended up getting that massive lightning strike that happened right outside my window and scared the absolute crap out of me.
So it hit a tree. Was that on your property?
No, it was actually on my neighbour's property, although it's quite close to my room.
And did it make a loud bang when that, because it looked like it fully ignited?
Yeah, it was super loud. And yeah, I think the tree did catch on fire a little bit.
Did it kind of shake the ground or anything, or what did you feel as that was happening?
I'm not sure. I can't really remember if it shook the ground. I mean, it probably did, but I was shaking after, so I would have no clue. I was petrified.
Was there anyone else in the house?
Yeah, I actually have 2 budgies in my room, which were okay. I got a cat, he was fine, and my brother, and he heard me scream very loud. It was so scary. I think I swore as well. I'm not sure if you can hear it in the video, though.
And so when you looked outside after, the video stops, but what did the tree look like after that?
It just looks the same. I mean, there might be some burnt leaves on there, but it looks pretty normal. Kind of fortunate everyone's all right after that. It looked very dramatic, didn't it? Yeah, oh my gosh, it was so scary. I'm surprised my budgies didn't have a heart attack or something. Like, oh my gosh, it was so loud.
Quite a start to the day.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was Amy Banchiga speaking to our reporter Nita Blake-Person, and it's a great relief to know that the 2 budgies and the cat are okay. And you've got to love this next story. A Dutchman who wanted to change his date of birth to boost his dating prospects has lost his legal battle to do so. Emil Ratelband, still aged 69, wanted to change his birth date by 20 years to avoid what he called discrimination. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports from The Hague.
Emil Ratelband may feel like a 40-year-old, and in a statement the court said he was at liberty to act accordingly. But the judges pointed out that age is more than just a number, and noted that allowing him to amend his date of birth would cause 20 years of records to vanish and create a range of undesirable legal and social implications. They highlighted the rights and obligations attached to age. The right to marry, drink alcohol, vote and drive a car. Emil Ratelband, a self-proclaimed positivity guru, outlined his case on the BBC last month.
My doctor says I'm a biological age is 40-42. And so he has to put it on paper. I said, okay, why I'm not that age? So I want to be that age, 49.
He was criticised by some for comparing his position to that faced by transgender people, including during this rather tense exchange with Jane Fay, who is an LGBT campaigner.
Well, I'm actually quite flabbergasted. I thought we were talking about discrimination here. I think you mentioned Tinder. I mean, I thought everybody fibbed on Tinder. I know I do. But quite seriously, when it comes to transgender, it's not just an identity. It is a medical condition that has been understood for 50 years.
It's the same. It's the same. My doctor says I have a biological age for 42. No.
Mr. Rattleband won global fame, but failed to convince the judges he was indeed being discriminated against, and was advised there were other ways to resolve his grievances under the existing law. In keeping with his position as an advocate of positive thinking, Mr. Rattleband was undeterred and thanked them for giving him all kinds of angles from which to appeal.
Anna Holligan with that report, and just enough time for some of your feedback. We've been talking today about science achievement in schools, or a lack of it at primary school level. This one from Barbara. The government has recently committed millions to Bikes in Schools program when we now hear our kids are not getting a basic science education. Where are our priorities in terms of investing in our children and New Zealand's future, says Barbara. And this one regarding primary school science. I'm a scientist. I try to work with teachers at my kids' school. At year 3 to 4, there is usually some interest, but the 7 to 8 teachers do not or cannot make it a priority. I don't understand the reasons, but I'm not surprised by the current data, this person says. And back to the mental health inquiry. This texter says, I'm a nurse in acute mental health. I have a background in working in addiction. We need more trained staff in hospitals and our communities. We see a crisis now. We need strong, wise responses. Also, we need to look at our staff who are traumatised and exhausted, this person says. We have amazing staff. Let's look after them. And finally, on New Zealand sending its plastic back to Malaysia. Steve says, clean and green at the expense of countries such as Malaysia, shameful, says Steve. That is Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. You can catch up with our stories online, rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, or on our Facebook page for all of the latest. But that's it for the moment. From me, Lisa Owen, and the Checkpoint team, you have a great night, and we will catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry has made 40 recommendations, including a crackdown on alcohol sales by raising the drinking age and the price. The Transport Agency suspended an East Tamaki inspector and his company Els Auto Services, affecting the warrants of fitness of 4,000 motorists. Rolly Heke has been sentenced to 7 years in jail after he got into a shootout with police near Morrinsville before going on the run in August last year. And the government has approved an extra $22.5 million funding for the America's Cup. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Focusing on the major Pacific stories of the day, Dateline Pacific.
It's good for Tuvalu because it's a small country. It was a really, really easy target.
Vanuatu's been consistently saying that it's not happy with the way that decisions are made, that they're not made in